You open your banking app. The balance says $312. You've been saving for 8 months, and this is what you have to show for it. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a person with $9. Zoo's already sitting in an account, watches it grow past $10,000 almost without trying. Same effort, same income bracket, maybe even lower. So why does their money seem to move on its own, while yours won't budge past $300? The problem isn't your income. It isn't your willpower either. Your brain treats your first $1, Zuzen, completely differently than it treats every dollar that comes after it. And once you see the mechanism, you'll understand why the beginning of saving feels like pushing a boulder uphill, while the middle feels like the boulder is rolling on its own. Start with the psychology, because the psychology comes first. In 1979, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky published Prospect Theory, and one finding from it explains almost everything about why your first $1,000 feels so fragile. Losses hurt roughly twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. Losing $50 doesn't feel like the opposite of gaining $50. It feels like getting punched. Now put that finding next to your bank balance. When you have $300 saved, every withdrawal is a visible, painful loss against a number you can barely stand to look at. Your car needs a $180 repair. That's not a dent in your savings. Psychologically, it's the destruction of 2/3 of everything you've built. You feel it. You remember it. And the next time you try to save, some part of your brain is bracing for that same loss to happen again. But here's the twist. When your balance is $9,000, that same $180 repair barely registers. It's 2% of the total. Same dollar amount. Same emergency. Completely different emotional weight. Loss aversion doesn't care about your income. It cares about the ratio between the loss and what you already have. And at the beginning, that ratio is brutal. There's a second mechanism working against you, and it comes from the economist Richard Thaler. Thaler studied something he called mental accounting, the way people treat money differently depending on which mental bucket it sits in, even though a dollar is a dollar no matter where it lives. When your savings account has $300 in it, your brain doesn't file that money under untouchable. It files it under money I have, technically. There's no wall between your savings and your spending, so when a temptation shows up, a concert ticket, a nice dinner, a sale, that $300 doesn't feel protected. It feels available. Once an account crosses a certain size, something shifts. Thaler and the economist Shlomo Benartzi built an entire retirement savings program called Save More Tomorrow around a related insight. People protect money far more fiercely once it starts to feel like a real asset instead of leftover cash. A $9,000 balance starts to feel like a thing you own. A foundation, a fund, an identity. A $300 balance still feels like cash that happens to be sitting in a savings tab instead of your checking account. Same bank, same interface, completely different psychological status. There's also a purely mathematical reason the middle stretch feels easier, and it has nothing to do with your behavior at all. Compound interest needs a base to work on. Put $300 into a high-yield savings account, earning 4% a year, and after 12 months, you've earned about $12. Barely enough to notice. Put $9,000 into that same account, and you earn roughly $360 without moving a finger. That's more than most people manage to save in 3 separate months of active effort. Early on, growth is invisible, so saving feels like the only force in the equation, and it feels entirely dependent on you. Later, growth becomes a second income stream running quietly underneath your own deposits, which is exactly why the second $10,000 can feel like it's arriving on its own. So let's walk through what actually happens when you try to save your first $1,000. versus what happens once you're from $1,000 toward $10,000. Picture two people, both saving $200 a month. The first person starts at zero. Month 1, they save $200. Month 2, the car needs new tires. There goes $220, wiping out more than they'd saved. Month 3, a friend's birthday, a slightly too expensive dinner, another $80 gone. By month 5, they've technically put in $1,000, but their actual balance is $340 because every emergency and every temptation had nothing to absorb it, except the fragile pile of cash they were trying to protect. There's no buffer. There's no momentum. Every setback erases weeks of progress, and every erasure makes the next attempt to save feel more pointless. The second person starts at $1,000. They save the same $200 a month. The same car repair happens, $220. But this time it barely dents a balance that already has real weight behind it. The account doesn't feel destroyed. It feels like it absorbed a hit and kept standing. And because the balance never crashes back to zero, the saver never has to relive that demoralizing restart. Each month compounds on the last instead of erasing it. By the time they reach $10,000, saving doesn't feel like willpower anymore. It feels like a system that's already running. This is the part almost nobody tells you. The first $1,000 is the only phase of saving where you have zero margin for error. There is no cushion to absorb a bad month, so a single emergency can undo half a year of discipline. Once you cross that threshold, every dollar you add is reinforcing an existing structure, instead of trying to build one from nothing on shaky ground. Not as something else about the two people in that example. The second saver didn't have better discipline than the first. They didn't earn more, budget harder, or want it more badly. They simply weren't starting from zero when the emergency hit. That's the part that gets mistaken for a character flaw. When people fail to save their first $1,000, they usually conclude something's wrong with them, that they lack the willpower other people seem to have. But willpower was never the variable that mattered most. Buffer was. Here's the data that makes this even more concrete. The Federal Reserve's report on the economic well-being of U.S. households has asked Americans a simple question for years. Could you cover an unexpected $400 expense using cash or its equivalent? In recent years, roughly 1 in 3 adults has said no. They'd have to borrow, sell something, or simply couldn't cover it at all. That's not a failure of discipline spread evenly across millions of people. It's a mathematical trap. If you don't have a buffer, every unexpected expense doesn't just cost you money. It costs you the compounding you'd already started building. You go back to zero, psychologically, even when the number on the screen says otherwise. Now for the counterintuitive part. Most people assume the hardest stretch of building wealth is the middle. Going from $10,000 to $100,000. Chasing bigger investment returns, learning about index funds, and compound interest. It isn't. The hardest stretch is the one with the least amount of money in it, because that's the only stretch with no shock absorber. Thomas Stanley, who spent decades studying self-made millionaires for his book, The Millionaire Next Door, found something similar in how these people talked about their early years. Almost none of them described their first few $1,000s as easy. They described it as the phase that taught them the behavior, the reflex of not touching the money, that everything afterward was built on. The first $1,000 isn't really about the money. It's the training your brain needs before larger numbers can start working in your favor. Once you understand that, the goal changes. You're not trying to save $1,000, because $1 is a meaningful sum of money. You're trying to build a buffer large enough that a single bad month can't erase your progress and reset your motivation back to zero. That buffer is what turns saving from a fight against your own psychology into a system that runs quietly in the background. The same system that let the person with $9 watch their balance grow past $10,000 almost without noticing. Knowing the mechanism also tells you how to fight it. Remember Thaler's mental accounting, the finding that money feels different depending on which bucket it sits in. You can use that bias against itself instead of letting it work against you. Move your first dollars into an account that's slightly harder to reach than your checking account. A separate bank, a named emergency fund. Anything that creates friction between you and the money. You're not trying to make the money disappear. You're trying to make it feel like it already belongs to a different version of your life, the same way $9,000 starts to feel untouchable simply by existing. The goal in these early months isn't to feel motivated every day. It's to survive the first few shocks without going back to zero, because the moment your buffer survives its first real test, your brain starts treating the account differently. Whether the balance is $1,200 or $12,000. So the next time your balance won't seem to move past a few $100s, know what you're actually fighting. You're not fighting bad math. You're not fighting low income. You're fighting the fact that your brain treats a fragile pile of cash as fair game and treats every setback against it as a bigger loss than it really is. Survive that phase. Protect that first buffer the way you'd protect something you already consider yours. And the next $10,000 won't test your willpower nearly as hard. It'll just show up, one deposit compounding quietly on top of the last. You open your banking app again. The balance still isn't huge, but this time, you understand why it felt so hard to get here, and why, from here, it only gets easier.